The snow came down without urgency, wide flakes drifting as if they had nowhere else to be. It softened the edges of the street, swallowing sound and turning headlights into pale smudges of light. The city, usually impatient even at night, seemed to hold its breath. At the far end of the block, beneath a narrow shelter meant for waiting and then leaving, a woman sat very still. She kept her hands tucked beneath her arms, shoulders curved inward, not for drama, but for heat. The bench was cold enough that it seemed to press back through her coat, or what passed for one. The fabric was thin, better suited for a room with walls than a place open on three sides. Snow crept in sideways, dusting the concrete near her shoes, gathering at the edges of the shelter like it was curious. Beside her feet rested a small bag, scuffed, too light to be useful. The zipper was half open, as if she hadn't cared enough to close it properly. Inside were a few folded clothes, a cracked phone charger, and a thick envelope whose corner had gone soft from being handled too many times in a few short hours. She didn't look at the envelope anymore. She already knew what it said. Instead, she watched her breath appear and disappear in front of her face, counting nothing in particular. Across the street, a bakery had long since closed, but the smell of sugar and yeast still lingered faintly in the cold air. Somewhere farther away, a train horn sounded, low, distant, indifferent. Cars passed without slowing. A bus rolled through the intersection once, empty, its interior lights harsh and uninviting, then disappeared down the hill. The shelter's posted schedule fluttered slightly in the wind, a piece of paper pretending it still mattered. Time moved, but not in a way that felt useful. The woman shifted her weight, wincing as pins and needles began to bloom in her feet. She pressed her heels against the concrete to ground herself, then pulled them back again, unsure what helped more. Her hair, damp from melted snow, clung to the side of her face. She brushed it back with stiff fingers and tucked it behind her ear, a small habit from a life that had structure earlier that morning. Earlier that day, she had been warm. That thought arrived uninvited, so she pushed it away. Tonight was about staying where she was, about not moving too fast, about letting the world do whatever it was going to do next. A gust of wind cut down the street, sharper than the others, and she exhaled through her nose, steadying herself. She told herself she would stand up in a minute. That movement meant options, that as long as she sat here, she could pretend she was still waiting for something ordinary. A bus, a ride, a reason. Footsteps crunched on the snow behind her. She noticed them only because they were uneven, layered, and more than one set moving at different rhythms. She didn't turn. People passed all the time. Groups laughed, argued, hurried by with their collars pulled up and their minds elsewhere. It was easier not to look. The footsteps slowed. A shadow shifted across the frosted glass of the shelter. Then another, smaller one. And another. She felt it then, the sensation of being seen, not stared at, not examined, but noticed. The way a room feels when someone enters quietly. Still, she didn't look up. A child's voice broke the hush, clear and unguarded. "Dad," the voice said, soft but certain. The words landed gently, without accusation, without fear. Just an observation, the kind that didn't ask permission to exist. The woman closed her eyes for a moment. There was a pause. Adult silence, measured, careful, followed, the kind that weighed options. Another child spoke, this one older, more tentative. A third voice said nothing, but she could sense the presence of someone small shifting their weight, snow crunching as they leaned closer to the opening of the shelter. Finally, a man spoke. His voice was low, calm, shaped by restraint. "Excuse me," he said, standing a respectful distance away. The question was ordinary, almost too ordinary. It offered an easy out. She opened her eyes and looked up. The man stood just outside the shelter, tall, his coat dusted white along the shoulders. 3 children hovered near him, bundled in bright layers that stood out against the muted night. One girl held her sleeves down over her hands. One boy rocked slightly on his heels. The youngest clutched the man's coat like an anchor. The woman met the man's eyes for half a second, long enough to register concern there, not urgency, and then nodded. "Yes," she said. Her voice surprised her. It still worked. The man glanced briefly at the posted schedule, then back at her. He didn't point out the obvious. He didn't correct her. He just nodded once, as if the answer made sense. "It's cold tonight," he said. She said it automatically, the way people do when they don't expect to be believed. The little girl frowned. "She's not okay," she said, matter of fact. The man crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to the woman's eye level without entering her space. "We live nearby," he said. "Just a few minutes away." "That's all right," he replied. No disappointment, no pressure. Snow settled on the bench between them. The city remained hushed, complicit in the moment. The youngest child tugged the man's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, not quietly enough. The woman almost laughed. The sound caught in her throat and turned into something else instead. The man smiled faintly at the child, then looked back at her. "We're going to head home," he said. "If you change your mind, we'll be right around the corner." "Yellow House, Bo." He stood, gathering the children with small, practiced motions. Mittens adjusted, hoods tugged into place. As they turned to leave, the little girl looked back once more and lifted her hand in a small wave. "You don't have to stay cold," she said simply. Then they were gone, footsteps receding, their shapes dissolving into the falling snow. The woman sat alone again. But the quiet felt different now, not emptier, just altered. As if something had been placed gently beside her, unseen but present. She stared down at her hands. They were shaking. For the first time that night, she wondered what it might feel like to stand. She didn't remember standing up. One moment she was seated, hands numb, breath shallow. Next, she was walking, her steps unsteady but determined, following the memory of a yellow house and a porch light that had been left on as if someone expected her. The street was quieter now. Snow had softened the tire tracks, erased urgency. Each step felt like a decision she hadn't fully agreed to yet. She told herself she would stop at the corner if the light was off. She told herself she would turn back if the door didn't open right away. She told herself many things that allowed her to keep moving. The house was exactly where he'd said it would be. Yellow siding, white trim. A single light glowed warm against the cold. It wasn't large, it wasn't impressive. It was simply there, solid and real. She stood at the edge of the walkway for a long moment, watching snow gather on the railing. Through the front window, she could see movement, shadows passing, a child darting briefly into view, then gone again. Life was continuing at a pace she had stepped out of earlier that day. She raised her hand to knock, lowered it, raised it again. Before she could decide, the door opened. The man stood there without surprise, as if he'd been listening for her footsteps. He didn't smile broadly or step aside right away. He simply nodded once, like this was a normal thing that happened sometimes. "I'm glad you came," he said. She swallowed. Warm air spilled out onto the porch, wrapping around her legs, her hands. She hadn't realized how cold she was until then. Her body reacted before her pride could object. Her shoulders sagged slightly. A breath she hadn't known she was holding finally released. He stepped back, giving her space to enter. She hesitated only a second before crossing the threshold. Inside, the house smelled like cocoa and something toasted. A low hum came from somewhere deeper in the rooms. Dishwasher, heater, life. Shoes were lined neatly by the door, 3 small pairs and 1 adult pair already damp with melting snow. "Shoes are fine," he said, noticing her glance. She slipped them off anyway, her fingers clumsy as she tugged at the laces. The floor beneath her socks was warm, almost painfully so. The children appeared in the hallway, curiosity barely contained. The girl in red peeked out first, then the boys clustered behind her. "She came back," the girl announced, not triumphantly, just stating a fact. The man nodded. He turned to the woman. She chose the edge of the couch. It was upholstered in a soft, worn fabric, the kind that had been chosen for durability rather than style. A blanket lay folded over the arm. She didn't touch it yet. Instead, she sat carefully, as if the furniture might object to her weight. The man disappeared briefly into the kitchen. She could hear cabinets opening, the clink of mugs. Steam rose a moment later, carrying the smell of chocolate into the room. "Hot cocoa," he said, setting a mug on the coffee table within her reach. "It's perfect," she said, though she hadn't tasted it yet. The children settled onto the floor with papers and pencils, spreading homework out like it was a shared ritual. One of the boys groaned quietly, then caught his father's eye and straightened. She watched them from her place on the couch, hands wrapped around the mug, letting the heat seep slowly into her palms. No one asked her name. No one asked why she'd been outside. The absence of questions felt intentional, like a kindness she hadn't known to expect. The man returned with a sweater draped over his arm. He didn't offer it immediately. He simply placed it on the chair beside her. "In case you're still cold," he said. She nodded, unable to speak just then. Minutes passed. The children worked through math problems, sounding out words, arguing softly over answers. The man leaned over the shoulders, pointed at lines on paper, and murmured encouragement. It was all so ordinary it almost hurt to watch. She pulled the sweater over her head eventually. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and something floral. It was too big, the sleeves covering her hands, the weight grounding. She took a sip of cocoa. It was sweet and rich and made her eyes sting unexpectedly. She stared into the mug until the feeling passed. No one commented. At some point, the girl looked up from her work and studied the woman openly. "You can use the bathroom if you want," she said. "It's down the hall." "Thank you," the woman replied, smiling despite herself. When she returned, the man had added a plate of toast to the table, butter melting slowly. He gestured to it without words. She ate a piece because her body asked her to, not because anyone insisted. Later, the children were sent upstairs to change for bed. Their footsteps thundered overhead, laughter echoing briefly before doors closed and quiet returned. The man brought her a glass of water and set it beside the mug. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need tonight," he said. "There's a guest room, or the couch. Safest." The words settled gently between them. She nodded. He accepted that without argument. A blanket was placed over her shoulders at some point. She wasn't sure when. She leaned back slightly, careful not to take up too much space, eyes following the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. Her body began to relax in ways she hadn't allowed it to all day. Muscles unclenched. Breathing deepened. The house held her without asking anything in return. From upstairs came the sound of a child calling good night. The man answered. Another voice followed. Another good night. When he returned to the living room, he moved quietly, as if not to disturb her, though she was awake. She nodded again. The lights dimmed slightly. The house settled. She lay there wrapped in borrowed warmth, listening to the quiet creaks and sighs of a home at rest. No explanations demanded, no story required. For the first time since the morning, she let her eyes close, not to escape, but to rest. And the night allowed it. The house did not sleep all at once. It settled in layers, pipes clicking as heat moved through them, wood adjusting to the cold, a distant thud as one child rolled over upstairs. Somewhere, a clock marked time quietly, each second indistinct from the last. The woman woke not with panic, but with awareness. The kind that arrives when the body has warmed enough to remember it exists. She lay on the couch, blanket pulled up to her chin, staring at the ceiling fan that wasn't moving. Shadows from passing headlights slid briefly across the walls and disappeared again. For a while, she simply breathed. From down the hall came a soft sound, the scrape of a chair, the clink of ceramic. Someone else is awake. She waited, unsure whether to announce herself. The thought of speaking felt heavier at night, when words seemed louder and harder to take back. A moment later, the man appeared at the edge of the living room, a mug in his hands. He stopped when he saw her eyes open. "Sorry," he said quietly. "No," she replied. Her voice was rough from disuse. He hesitated, then gestured toward the kitchen. "I was making tea." She considered it, then nodded. They sat at the small kitchen table, not across from each other, but at adjacent sides, angled slightly apart. The light above them was dimmer than earlier, the kind meant for evenings when the day is done, asking things of you. He slid a mug toward her. Chamomile. She recognized the scent instantly and felt an unexpected ache behind her ribs. They drank in silence for a few minutes. He didn't fill the space, neither did she. Eventually, he spoke. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. She nodded, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup. She wrapped her hands around it, grounding herself in the warmth. "I know," she said. The words came out before she'd fully decided to speak next. "I was told to leave today," she continued, her tone even, almost distant. "Not slowly, not after discussions." He didn't react outwardly. No sharp intake of breath, no visible judgment, just attention. "He said I wasn't enough," she said. "Not as a person, as a future." She paused, feeling the weight of the sentence settle between them. "I couldn't give him what he wanted," she went on. She didn't elaborate, didn't name specifics. She didn't need to. The truth was contained in the shape of the words themselves. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock. When he finally spoke, it was not to contradict her or rush to comfort. "I used to think family was something you built by following the right steps," he said. "Do the right things in the right order." He glanced toward the hallway that led to the stairs. She looked up at him then. "My children didn't come into my life the way I expected," he continued. "And not all at once. Each one arrived when things were already messy." He took a sip of tea, set the mug down carefully. "What made us a family wasn't how we started. It was a choice to stay." He didn't say more than that. He didn't explain the loss in detail. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer reassurance as a gift that needed to be accepted. He simply let the truth exist. Something in her chest shifted. It wasn't relief exactly. It was more like the easing of a clenched fist she hadn't known she was holding. The idea that worth could be measured by presence instead of outcome settled into her quietly. He shook his head once, not sharply, just enough to signal disagreement. "Sometimes things end because they're built on conditions," he said. She absorbed that. They sat there a while longer, neither of them rushing to stand. The tea cooled. The clock kept time. Eventually, she pushed her chair back slightly. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He stood first, leaving her space to follow when she was ready. "There's a bed made in the guest room," he added. "Tonight." The word felt merciful. As she walked down the hallway toward the room he indicated, she felt lighter in a way that didn't demand optimism. Just a room, space where judgment had been. She closed the door behind her, leaned back against it for a moment, and exhaled. The truth had been spoken, and it had not destroyed her. Morning arrived without ceremony. The snow had thinned overnight, retreating into gray slush along the curb. Water dripped steadily from the eaves, a slow, patient sound that marked time more reliably than any clock. The city stretched itself awake again, engines humming, doors opening, life resuming where it had paused. The woman stood at the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't made herself. Sunlight filtered through the window, catching on dust motes and the edge of the table. She watched a sparrow hop along the fence outside, unbothered by the cold that lingered in the air. No one rushed her. The man moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, packing lunches, checking notes on the counter. The children filtered in one by one, sleep softened, hair still tangled, voices low. They greeted her without comment, as if her presence required no explanation. The man asked, not looking up. "Toast is fine," she replied. He nodded and made it. That was how the days unfolded. She stayed because she was invited to stay, not urged, not convinced, just allowed. At first, she lingered on the edges, wiping the counter after meals, folding a blanket that didn't need folding, stepping aside whenever someone passed. She learned the rhythm of the house by watching, when voices were welcome, when silence was preferred, how the light shifted in the afternoon across the living room floor. No one assigned her a role. Still, she found herself filling small spaces. She helped the youngest tie his shoes one morning when his fingers were too impatient to cooperate. She held a spelling list while the girl recited words at the table, nodding encouragement when the letters tangled. She noticed when the older boy went quiet and slid a plate toward him without comment. Each gesture was small. None were acknowledged out loud, but they were noticed. The snow disappeared completely by the third day. The street outside darkened with wet pavement instead of white. Coats were hung by the door, lighter ones now. The house breathed easier. One afternoon, the man paused as she carried a basket of laundry toward the hallway. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied. She did it anyway. Later, he thanked her, not with words, but by leaving a note on the counter with the Wi-Fi password and a line beneath it, "Use anything you need." That night, she slept in the guest room instead of on the couch. Days turned into something that resembled routine. She walked with the children to the corner in the mornings. She sat at the table in the afternoons with a book she hadn't finished in years. She laughed once, quietly, surprised by the sound, and no one stared. At some point, she realized she was no longer counting hours. She was counting moments instead. One evening, as the sky faded into deep blue, the man stood at the sink washing dishes while she dried them beside him. The children were upstairs, arguing about something trivial. "You're good with them," he said, not as praise, just an observation. She shrugged. He nodded. That was all. Later, alone in the guest room, she sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle. She thought about the bench at the bus shelter, the way time had felt heavy there, the way she had been waiting for something without knowing what. She wasn't waiting anymore. She didn't know what came next. No plans were announced, no promises made, but she had space to choose. The house continued around her, warm, imperfect, alive, and somehow, without ceremony, it had made room. Sometimes, the smallest moments change everything. A pause, a door left open, a question not asked. If this story found you tonight, where are you watching from? What part of the world are you in right now? Have you ever been helped by a stranger, or been one? Do you believe quiet kindness still exists? Tell us in the comments. And if you're still waiting for a second beginning, maybe it's already closer than you think.